Hi and welcome to our EpiDoc training program, for which you can see a link at the bottom of the screen. And in this session, Gabriel Bodar of the University of London is going to talk about the history of EpiDoc. So please, Gabby.
Thank you, Irene. Yes, so I want to talk about a bit of how EpiDoc became what it is now. I don't really want this to be a history in the sense of a chronological story. This is not something that will fulfill your curiosity as to what happened in the last 20 years of EpiDoc development, but it really is about what EpiDoc is now as a result of the various developments and contributions that have happened to it over time. Because EpiDoc is and always has been something that that exists and has tooling, has community, has communication platforms, has training, and has recommendations as a result of contributions of all of those things from projects, from individuals, from funded activities that needed some of those resources and those tools for their own work. And as a result of the collaborative way in which EpiDoc and a lot of digital humanities work takes place, these have all contributed to what EpiDoc is. So EpiDoc is, in some ways, a sort of accidental agglomeration of all of the things different people and different projects have needed it to be over the last 20 years. So this by way of a little recap of some of the important trends in that development. So if we want a timeline, as it were, of some kind, we can sort of loosely have a look at it in this way, although these things overlap with each other, and some things happen sort of out of sequence. But I'll go through roughly this sequence of activities as listed on this slide. So starting back in ancient history. In both senses of the word, the International Epigraphic Association, EGLE, in about 1997 produced or put together a commission which was called EAGLE, for Electronic Archive of Greek and Latin Epigraphy, to investigate and come up with recommendations for how to bring all of the epigraphic databases that existed into a single platform, or at least into a single search interface. And they had a series of meetings, and in 1999 they published a report on this commission that can still be found on Silvio Panchera's old website, in which, in a small footnote, was written this quote that I've given at the bottom of the screen, which loosely translated means, whatever database you use, make sure you can export into XML from it. And this footnote, anecdotally, I'm told, was added by Charles Crowther, who may have been the only person in the room who understood what it meant, in fact. But it was very important, as that became then enshrined in the recommendation from EAGLE for the encoding of digital epigraphic information. At about the same time, a group of graduate students and early career scholars at the Ancient World Mapping Center at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill had been discussing how to encode Latin epigraphy using XML, and they came up with this recommendation, which they, on seeing the Panchera footnote, they decided to publish this recommendation as a contribution to that discussion, and they called this EpiDoc, for epigraphic documents. And version 1 of this was published in 2000, authored by Tom Elliott, Hugh Kalis, and Amy Hawkins. And what this basically did was it recommended the use of TEI, which was an XML, or at the time SGML, encoding language for literary and linguistic corpora, which had existed for well over 10 years already at that time, and been used very widely. And they So they wanted to use existing art, so TEI, and also they wanted to continue to use the Leiden distinctions, not only the Leiden conventions, but the distinctions recorded and captured by the Leiden conventions for encoding epigraphic information. So they were neither reinventing how to mark up an inscription, because we already do that in Leiden, nor were they reinventing how to encode something in XML, because they used TEI, which already existed. All they were doing was mapping between the two. Later developments of EpiDoc added to this the existence of conventional fields from an epigraphic edition, such as description, history, find location, date, categories, and so forth, which you can find in various databases, including the Eagle databases and Petraea and others, and again mapped those to TEI XML rather than trying to invent a new way to encode an epigraphic edition. And as this was expanded for neighboring disciplines, including papyrology, but also other types of inscribed object, including seals and coins, and other scripts, including many others over the years, this principle remained the same, that we used existing standards to map to something fairly conventional like TEI XML to create a set of guidelines which were really, a dictionary, a glossary between two different languages. I've already briefly said what the TEI was, but the point here is that TEI already existed and was very widely used, and EpiDoc is a customization of TEI and always has been perceived as something which, rather than adding new elements or other features to TEI, rather took the very large menu of elements available in TEI and narrowed it down to just those we needed and made very specific ways in which they were used. So it's very much a recommendation for what subset of TEI to use to encode a set of inscriptions. So every EpiDoc file is a conformant TEI file. Even if there are lots and lots of different kinds of TEI, not all of which are EpiDoc, everything that's EpiDoc is TEI. The first corpus that was published using EpiDoc was the Aphrodisias in Late Antiquity corpus in 2004, and we've been working on that for several years as part of conversations about EpiDoc with Tom Elliott and co. In those conversations, we also had very strong and useful contributions from the US Epigraphy project at Brown University, led by John Bodell, and the Vindolanda Tablets online corpus, which was published a little bit sooner, in fact, at the University of Oxford. And through all of these, and through also this larger project on the inscriptions of Aphrodisias, several things happened. First, the guidelines were rewritten to a degree. Secondly, a set of star sheets were built that transformed EpiDoc into web pages. Those were needed by several of these corpora, and so the creation of these star sheets became the first set of canonical EpiDoc tooling that was usable by others and was open source from the outset. But the other thing that happened under the aegis of the Inscriptions of Aphrodisias project was, as part of the funding from the funding body, a dozen or so workshops were held in various parts of the world to discuss neighboring disciplines, including things like papyrology and numismatics, but also things like prosopography and geography and other features that we might want to compare to and map against EpiDoc encoding and EpiDoc projects. And also the first couple of training events for EpiDoc took place during this time. So the existence of a funded project which had written into its budget many thousands of pounds for international conferences and workshops was really essential in getting the conversations going that helped us to build EpiDoc into what it was at the time. For the first time, it was a community of practice that lots of people were coming to learn about, people were getting excited about, people wanted to know whether it would work for them, and people wanted to see tools that showed how well it would work. And we were able to show them things rather than just having a theoretical, recommendation for how you might go about this. A little bit after the culmination of the Inscriptions of Aphrodisias project, while simultaneously other projects of that vein were going on, notably the inscriptions of Roman Cyrenaica, which continued to run along that time and run more workshops and do more development for EpiDoc. But at around that time, I think starting in about 2008, the Integrating Digital Papyrology project, which resulted in Papyri.info, began. And this was a project funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to take basically the Duke Databank of Documentary Papyri, but also a few other databases that were in a similar position, and sort of rescue them from their existing incarnation, which was becoming quite difficult to manage for a variety of administrative and financial and technical reasons, turn them into XML, turn them into EpiDoc XML, and build tooling around that to deliver that. So the Papyri.info projects, which ran for a total of 5 years from 2007 to 11, built several tools, all of which are still useful and are part of the core EpiDoc toolset now. A series of conversion tools for converting data sets from other databases into EpiDoc, including in some cases to convert the EpiDoc back into that other database format losslessly, so that things that databases are better at doing than XML corpora are could be done in that form, like mass changes and so forth, and then it could be published again using the EpiDoc interface. Probably the single largest thing that was created was the Papyrological Navigator, which was this publication platform, but also a search and browse platform for this very large corpus of papyri, which in fact was three corpora sort of in combination: the Duke Databank and the Heidelberger Gesamtverzeichnis, which had almost identical content but very different information about each record, and then the APIS Advanced Papyrological Information System database, which had a slightly smaller but only slightly overlapping set of content, which means there were some tens of thousands of papyri in total in that database. The thing that people got most excited about, I think, was this tool that was originally called the Son of Suda Online, although people now mostly call it the Papyrological Editor, although there are other instances of the tool other than the Papyrological Editor, which is primarily a workflow and editorial management tool. It sets up editorial boards. It enables you to submit and vet and publish new texts or changes to existing text, emendations and so forth. But one small part of it, which is the part that really gets people excited, is this part which is which we call Leiden Plus, which is a tagless editing interface. So this enables you to type EpiDoc into the system, while all you see on your screen and all you have to press on your keyboard is essentially Leiden with a couple of very minor and quite intuitive additions. So it hides the EpiDoc, which for some of us is a bad thing, but for a lot of people, you can imagine, is a very welcome thing. And the final two things on this list, I want to stress them because this was a place where the funding agency, the Mellon Foundation, were actually very forward-thinking about this. Very often, when you apply for funding, you'll say, "I want, £500,000, and I want to do X, Y, and Z project with it." And the funding agents will come back to you and say, "Well, we'll give you 300, and you have to drop two-fifths of what you were going to do." When we went to Mellon for the third phase of Papyri.info, we said, we want, I think, $800,000 to do this. They wrote back and they said, "We want to give you $850,000, and we want you to do more documentation and more dissemination than you have been proposing to do," which turned out to be really forward-thinking, because the documentation really made sure that people were going to use these systems. Both people, individual papyrologists, were going to edit and add text to this, but also other developers were going to work with the software and build other tools on top of that. And the dissemination and training was basically a series of training workshops of the kind that is behind these EpiDoc tutorials, that really began to really embed both EpiDoc training and Leiden Plus training in our way of working, and there are now several such workshops per year in various parts of the world. The next phase, although again, as I say, these were very overlapping and not exactly chronological, but the next phase I want to talk about is a series of projects related again to the Eagle project, which started this whole story. But this is a project called the Eagle Europeana Network. And this was a project primarily to bring together, again, similarly to the Papyri.info project, to bring together many different epigraphic databases using EpiDoc, using conversion tools, including conversions that might go in both directions, to provide both a single search interface, but also other features on top of that. So there was migration of data sets, including bidirectional conversion, as I just said. And there was a lot of community involvement, not only the community of epigraphers, but involving the general public in working with inscription in various ways, especially using some of these Wikimedia and Wikidata tools to enable people to find out of copyright or open licensed photographs on the internet, on Wikimedia Commons and places like that, and identify them against the published inscriptions that they were photographs of, to provide translations for inscriptions or link translations again to the publications of the inscriptions, and lots of building of apps, things that you could do that made working with inscriptions fun. I mean, it's fun anyway, but fun for people who don't know that yet. And all of these sorts of things. And again, one of the small things which has turned out to have a very big impact is the starting to move in the direction of linked open data with the Eagle vocabularies, which are simply a set of authority lists of epigraphic terminology. Things like types of material, types of object, classifications of texts, dating criteria, things like this, the standard terminology for them in various languages with various variants, so that when I say that this is on marble and someone else says this is on blue-veined marble and someone else says the same thing in Russian, they say mramor or whatever, we can nevertheless know that they're all the same kind of material that's being talked about. And the same with various different kinds of, whether you say something's an epitaph or a tomb or a grave, all of these things are, can be linked together at various levels. Following on from that, but also following on from recent news that the epigraphic database Heidelberg, which was the largest single database in the original Eagle consortium and one that had been going for a very long time, was about to lose its funding and was going to therefore become a static database. And also the main Eagle Europeana project having completed, the community came together very much inspired by Papyri.info to try and create a parallel Epigraphy.info, which would help with the curation and long-term engagement with and sustainability of various epigraphic databases. So it wasn't attempting to build a single database that would contain everything. It wasn't attempting to build an editing interface with a single editorial board of the kind that Papyri.info has, but it was really trying to bring together a large community of people to think about sustainability and to think about compatibility, technical compatibility of content. And so it's to start with, it's a federation. So it's not at the moment, it's not a technical tool, it's a community of people having a conversation. There's talk about thinking of curation of epigraphic collections on a national level. So there might be one editorial board for Italian epigraphy and one editorial board for, Iberian epigraphy, that sort of thing. There's talk that some of these communities might be interested in the sort of editing and version control interfaces that Papyri.info have, but not all would. There's certainly a lot of talk about how linked open data will be used to help bring these things together, how to disambiguate, how to record co-references when the same inscription appears in 10 different databases and so forth. And this is really an ongoing conversation at the moment. There is some development going on, some demonstration tools being built, but it's very much a discussion rather than a finished project or anything that's that looks like a traditional project run by a single PI or anything. And as part of that is this movement that is that doesn't really have a single home, which is why I'm using an image of the of a Google group discussion group, which is not a very adequate image to represent a community, but there's this epigraphic ontology discussion taking place, which partly comes out of Epigraphy.info, but had already been going on for several years before as part of the most active people in EpiDoc development, and also was given a new lease of life by becoming an activity in the linked pasts community. And this community are very much thinking about how to, in relation to existing ontologies, which is to say, you know, the language that one uses to describe entities in linked open data, how, in relation to things like the Lord ontology, linked ancient world data, the Numisma, numismatic ontology, the epigraphic database Heidelberg, and the Eagle vocabularies, we can build an ontology which is flexible enough but coherent enough to describe epigraphic collections in such a way that they can be usefully linked to one another. And the main needs of this community and of this discussion are in examples of code that are easy to see how they work and how they link things together, and tools for both generating that code from your EpiDoc XML, because no one wants to have to be generating linked open data by hand, because linked open data is really only important when it's at massive scale, so you really don't want to do that by hand. But also tools for searching linked open data, for visualizing those links between things and so forth. And the final thing I'll just mention, again, this is a little bit older than some of the other things we've mentioned, but is the FS editing, the publication platform. So the FS is a user-friendly publication tool, which is works more or less out of the box. If you have some EpiDoc files, you can download FS, put them in, open it in a web browser, and you can see your files in your web browser as they would look when you publish them on the web. And obviously you'll want to customize it. You'll want to create your own interface, your own skin for the site. You may want to create different indices. You may want to create different search options and so forth. But the customization features are also very, very easy to use and very well documented. So in summary, the full EpiDoc tool set that we have is, and this is very much a simplification of it, but the summary of the most important things they exist as a result of various different projects that have run over the last 20 years since the beginning of the Aphrodisias project in 2001, really, so exactly 20 years ago. But conversations started a year or two before that. And as a result of those works and those contributions, some of these tools came into existence at various points, and some of these tools were massively improved and made much more useful and continue to be maintained through this community. And there's a very active community now of people who work with EpiDoc, who regularly look at these tools and make sure that they're still up to date, and if there's things that need to be improved and so forth. Almost all are people who are in part funded through EpiDoc projects of one kind or another. So that same principle, that the existence of people who need these things really help these things to come into being. And so the EpiDoc guidelines, which is a text collection explaining how you would encode this epigraphic feature or papyrological feature or sigillographic feature in XML. The reference style sheets, which is a set of scripts which will take your EpiDoc files and turn them into individual web pages or individual PDFs or other formats for publication. There's a schema, which is a set of rules for what elements you can use in EpiDoc and in what context you can use them, that helps you by validating your file. And there is FS, which I just described, the very user-friendly publication tool, which is very useful not only for teaching, but also for use as part of the workflow of working with a project. And even if you weren't going to use this as your final publication tool, which quite a lot of people do, but even if you weren't, you might find it useful while you're editing your files to have FS open to be able to view the changes you make immediately in there. And a bunch of third-party tools, some of which I've talked about here, the Papyrological Navigator and Editor, which are not maintained by the EpiDoc community, although the people they are maintained by are also part of the EpiDoc community, but they maintain them with different hats on. The Perseids, which is a bunch of tools associated to but slightly independent from the Perseus digital library. That includes a version of Sosol, the tool behind the papyrological editor, and various other things that work with EpiDoc files. The Eagle vocabularies, the Eagle wikis, various other tools which are not maintained by EpiDoc but are very useful to the EpiDoc community, are also available for people to take, to reuse, to build on as part of their project work, and some of them may end up being being folded back into core EpiDoc deliverables as well. So that's what I wanted to say about how EpiDoc became what it is. A reminder here of where you can find everything there is to find about EpiDoc from the main EpiDoc homepage at epidoc.stoa.org. And in case you had any questions or objections or anything else about what I've said here, you're welcome to get in touch.
Thank you very much, Gabi. It was really useful.
Great, thank you.